She stood by his fence, pointing at the century-old oak as if it were a criminal. "Cut it down or I'll take this to court," Karen declared loudly, her voice full of entitlement. For John, who had cherished the tree as a connection to generations of his family, her demand felt like a slap in the face. How could anyone so easily dismiss something so precious? But Karen wasn't stopping there. She filed a lawsuit, forged documents, and even orchestrated a secret attempt to destroy the oak in the dead of night. She was certain she would win. She was certain no one would dare stand in her way. But what Karen didn't know was that John had prepared a response. He had evidence that would turn her world upside down. The fallout from her actions wasn't just surprising, it was devastating to her reputation. But let's start from the beginning. John Wilson's home was more than a house. It was a sanctuary filled with history, memories, and a sense of belonging. Nestled at the edge of a quiet neighborhood, his backyard was dominated by a towering oak tree, its massive branches spreading like a guardian's arms over the property. This wasn't just any tree. It was a century-old oak, planted by John's great-grandfather when the land was first settled. For John, this oak was more than wood and leaves. It was a living monument to his family's legacy, a symbol of resilience and strength. Its deep roots, a metaphor for the bonds that held his family together through generations. Every morning, John performed the same ritual. With a steaming cup of tea in his hands, he would stand at his kitchen window and gaze out at the oak. Its grandeur filled him with peace. The rustling leaves seemed to whisper stories of the past, and the sturdy trunk stood as a reminder that no matter how fierce the storms of life, one could always endure. But this particular morning was different. The peaceful sound of the morning breeze was abruptly interrupted by a sharp, commanding voice. It came from the yard, breaking through the usual serenity like an unwelcome intruder. John set down his tea and walked outside, where he saw his neighbor Karen standing at the edge of her property. Known in the neighborhood for her abrasive personality and domineering attitude, she was gesticulating wildly toward the oak tree, her face set in a scowl. "John," Karen called out, her tone loud and accusatory, "we need to talk about this tree." Confused but trying to remain polite, John walked closer. "Good morning, Karen," he said evenly. "Is something wrong?" Karen crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing at the tree as if it were an enemy. "That thing is a danger to my property. Look at it. It's massive. If it falls, my house will be destroyed." John looked at the tree, its solid trunk standing firm, its branches healthy and full of leaves. "Karen, I understand your concern," he replied, keeping his voice calm. "But this tree has been here for over 100 years. It's healthy. I've had it inspected regularly by a certified arborist. There's no risk of it falling." Karen scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "Oh, please. Just because some tree guy says it's fine doesn't mean it won't come crashing down in the next storm. You need to cut it down, or I'll take legal action." Her words struck John like a slap. The thought of removing the oak was unthinkable. It wasn't just a tree. It was part of his family's story, a piece of his identity. "Karen," he said firmly, "this tree is on my property, and there's no evidence that it poses any danger. I'm sorry, but I can't just cut it down because you're worried." Karen's expression hardened. "Then I guess you'll be hearing from my lawyer," she snapped, before turning on her heel and marching back toward her house. John stood frozen, stunned by her audacity. As the morning sunlight filtered through the oak's leaves, he felt a mix of disbelief and anger bubbling up inside him. How could someone so easily dismiss the value of something so irreplaceable? Later, sitting at his kitchen table, John's mind raced. This wasn't just about a tree. It was about his rights, his heritage, and his deep connection to the land. He couldn't believe he was being forced into a fight to defend something so sacred. But as he looked out at the oak, its leaves shimmering in the light, John felt a steely resolve settle over him. Karen might have started this battle, but he wasn't about to let her win. This was more than a dispute between neighbors. It was a clash of values, and John knew he'd have to dig in, just like the roots of his beloved oak, to protect what truly mattered. A few days after Karen's dramatic threats, John received an official-looking envelope in the mail. As he opened it at his kitchen table, his heart sank. Inside was a letter from Karen's lawyer, demanding the immediate removal of the oak tree. The letter claimed that the tree posed a direct hazard to Karen's property, threatening significant legal action and hefty fines if John didn't comply. For a moment, John simply stared at the paper, the weight of its implications sinking in. His oak, the steadfast symbol of his family's legacy, was now under legal assault. But as frustration simmered into determination, John made a decision. He wouldn't let this stand. After a quick call to his attorney, John gathered every document he could find to prove the tree was healthy and situated entirely on his property. Inspection reports, photos, land surveys, anything that could demonstrate Karen's claims were baseless. His attorney, a sharp and compassionate professional, reassured him, "You have a strong case, John. Don't worry, we'll handle this." Meanwhile, Karen wasn't content to let the legal process run its course. She began spreading rumors throughout the neighborhood, painting John as reckless and inconsiderate. "He doesn't care about anyone else's safety," she told neighbors during her evening walks. "That tree could crush my house, or worse." Some neighbors, unaware of the full story, began to question John. A few even approached him with concerns about the tree, but others who understood how much the oak meant to him stood by his side. "Don't let her bully you, John," one neighbor said firmly. "That tree has been here longer than all of us combined." The tension in the neighborhood grew, and John could feel the pressure mounting. Every time he stepped outside, he could sense the weight of curious or judgmental eyes. Despite this, he refused to back down. Then, one quiet night, John was startled awake by an odd noise outside. It was a low, mechanical hum, accompanied by faint voices. Groggy but alert, he slipped on his robe and went to the window. What he saw made his blood run cold. Two figures were standing by the oak tree, wielding a chainsaw. The machine's harsh growl pierced the stillness of the night as they prepared to cut into the trunk. John's heart raced. Without hesitation, he grabbed his phone and called the police. "There are people trying to cut down my tree," he told the dispatcher, his voice urgent but steady. "Please send someone immediately." Minutes later, flashing lights illuminated the dark street as police officers arrived. The would-be vandals, caught in the act, dropped the chainsaw and fled into the night before the officers could apprehend them. Though the tree was unharmed, the incident left John shaken. The officers assured him they would investigate, but without clear evidence linking anyone to the act, they couldn't make an immediate arrest. As the police drove away, John stood under the oak's sprawling branches, his hands trembling. He knew this wasn't a random act. Someone, likely Karen or someone acting on her behalf, had tried to take matters into their own hands. Back inside, John sat at his kitchen table, his resolve hardening. This was no longer just about a tree, it was about principle, about standing up against intimidation and protecting what mattered most. The battle was far from over, but one thing was clear: John wasn't going to give up. Karen followed through on her threats, filing a lawsuit that claimed the oak tree posed an immediate danger to her property. The case quickly became a hot topic in the neighborhood, dividing opinions. While a few sided with Karen, most saw her actions as an overreach, especially knowing how much the tree meant to John. John, determined to defend his beloved oak, worked closely with his attorney. He hired certified arborists to inspect the tree, and their findings were clear. The oak was healthy, stable, and posed no risk. Armed with their report and property deeds proving the tree stood entirely on his land, John felt ready for court. Karen, however, wasn't playing fair. During preparations, John's attorney discovered that Karen had submitted a questionable property survey claiming the tree partially extended onto her land. The numbers didn't match the official records, raising suspicions. "This looks altered," John's attorney remarked, her resolve to expose Karen growing stronger. The court date arrived, and tension filled the small courtroom. Karen's lawyer painted a dramatic picture of the oak as a dangerous nuisance, while John's attorney calmly presented the arborist's report, systematically debunking Karen's claims. Then came the pivotal moment. "Your Honor," John's attorney announced, "we have video evidence to present." The room fell silent as the footage played. It showed Karen, late at night, directing workers toward the oak with clear intent to cut it down. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as the judge watched intently. When the video ended, the judge turned to Karen. "Miss Parker," he said sternly, "this behavior is deeply troubling. Combined with the inconsistencies in your submitted evidence, this court cannot overlook your conduct." Karen stammered, attempting to explain, but her arguments fell apart. The judge dismissed her claims, ruled in favor of John, and ordered Karen to cover his legal fees. As John stepped out of the courthouse, he felt an immense sense of relief. The oak tree, his family's legacy, had been vindicated. Looking up at its sturdy branches, he knew he had stood firm, just like the tree, and won. The day of the final ruling felt electric, as if the entire neighborhood was holding its breath. John sat in the courtroom, his hands clasped tightly together, eyes fixed on the judge. Beside him, his attorney gave him a reassuring nod. Across the room, Karen's previously confident demeanor was gone, replaced with visible unease. The judge's voice broke the silence. After reviewing the evidence and testimony, this court finds in favor of Mr. Wilson. A wave of relief washed over John as those words sank in. The judge continued, addressing Karen with an unmistakable tone of disapproval. Miss Parker, your actions have been found not only unjustified, but deliberately deceitful. You submitted falsified evidence, engaged in reckless behavior, and attempted to manipulate this court. Karen was ordered to issue a public apology to John, covering not just her false claims, but the distress she caused him. Additionally, she was required to pay all of John's legal fees and a hefty fine for her attempt to illegally cut down the oak. The ruling was clear. Karen's actions wouldn't be tolerated. As John left the courthouse, the news spread quickly through the neighborhood. Those who had initially doubted him began approaching with words of support. "We're sorry, John," one neighbor admitted. "We should have stood by you sooner. That tree is part of what makes this community special." Karen's reputation took a dramatic hit. The same people she had tried to rally against John now viewed her with disapproval and frustration. No longer able to justify her actions, she became an object of quiet disdain among the neighbors. For John, the victory was about more than just keeping the tree. Standing under its sprawling branches that evening, he felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The oak had weathered storms, time, and even Karen's relentless attempts to bring it down. It stood as a testament to resilience and justice, a symbol that no matter how difficult the battle, the truth would prevail. Looking up at the tree, John smiled. The oak had once again proven its strength, and so had he. The neighborhood felt different now, quieter, more united. And though Karen's voice no longer echoed with demands, the lesson she left behind remained clear. No one, no matter how insistent, is above the law. The courtroom drama had ended, but its ripples spread through the neighborhood like a stone dropped into still water. Karen, once so confident and outspoken, found herself at the center of widespread disapproval. Her reputation, already fragile, crumbled as neighbors began discussing her behavior in hushed but unmistakably critical tones. "Did you hear she faked documents to win that case?" whispered one neighbor at a community gathering. "Imagine trying to destroy something so meaningful, just out of spite," replied another. Karen's attempts to defend herself only made things worse. She claimed her actions were for the safety of the neighborhood, but no one was buying it anymore. The evidence presented in court had been too damning, and the public apology she was forced to make only highlighted the seriousness of her misconduct. The once respected figure in the community now found herself isolated, avoided even by those who had initially supported her. For weeks, Karen tried to regain her footing, but the damage was irreparable. The final blow came when a for sale sign appeared on her front lawn. By the end of the month, Karen had packed up her belongings and left the neighborhood, leaving behind a legacy of strained relationships and lingering resentment. Meanwhile, John stood under his beloved oak tree, gazing up at its sprawling branches. The soft rustle of the leaves felt like a reassuring whisper. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to breathe deeply, free of the stress and conflict that had consumed his days. The tree had stood firm against Karen's relentless attempts to bring it down, and so had he. Neighbors began approaching John, many of them offering apologies for not standing by him sooner. "You were right to fight for this tree," one said. "It's part of what makes this place feel like home." Their words brought a warmth to John's heart. He hadn't just won the case. He had reminded everyone of the importance of protecting what truly matters. The oak tree, with its deep roots and towering strength, became a symbol for more than just John's family. It represented the power of resilience and the triumph of integrity over deceit. John often found himself standing beneath its branches, reflecting on the journey. For him, the battle wasn't just about a tree. It was about standing up for what's right, even when the odds seemed stacked against him. And as he looked at the sturdy trunk, he knew this. The fight had been worth it. The oak, like his resolve, would continue to stand tall for years to come. A quiet but enduring reminder that no amount of manipulation or threats could ever uproot what is truly grounded in strength and justice.